Before joining HCA in mid-2019, Dan was the executive director of the Newcastle Historical Society. And as a native Delawarean, Dan is enjoying the challenges of preserving and interpreting all aspects of Delaware's history for the public. So today he'll be presenting Bridging the Past and Future at Cooch's Bridge Historic Site. So thank you for being here, Dan, and I will let you share your screen and take it away.
Thank you very much. So everybody, please bear with us as hopefully this works on the first try. All right, is that showing up for everybody correctly?
You look good.
All right, and then can you see my cursor as well on there?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. And yeah, so this is an aerial shot of Cooch's Bridge Historic Site. And before we get into Cooch's Bridge, just want to kind of explain what HCA is. The Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs is a state agency, and we are organized under the Delaware Department of State. We administer, as was already said, 6 museums across all 3 counties of Delaware, and then our collections include both historic and archaeological resources, and the State Historic Preservation Office is located within our division. Normally, the next slide would be a slide explaining what is SHPO, but I think with our audience today, I don't have to worry so much about that one. So if anybody does have questions, I'm happy to answer it, and I know there's some people from SHPO here as well. So the state collection, we do have quite a few objects on display in our museums. We also have loans out to other organizations, but then the vast majority of the remainder of the collections that are not currently on display are here in Dover. And you can see here we have some of our Victrola collection, and then also some of the archaeological collection. So whenever there is work that is done in the state, done by another state agency such as DelDOT or something like that, those archaeological discoveries come here to us. We also administer about 40 properties, and a lot of those are actually leased out to other organizations that maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to afford at their own location. Some of them are under renovation right now. We do have the ones that we operate. But the great thing about this is it's an opportunity for other historical organizations and other cultural organizations to be able to have a home base. Those properties that are owned by the state are still open to the public in some fashion so that people can still enjoy them, and they're being preserved. It's much better for the buildings to have people in them and helping keep an eye on them, and then our maintenance and horticulture teams can get up there and do what needs to be done. So our state museums include, as was already said, the Old State House and Johnson Victrola Museum in Dover. There's Wanendale Museum down in Lewis. And then we also have the John Dickinson Plantation that is just south of Dover. And then up in Newcastle County, we have the Newcastle Courthouse Museum and the Cooch's Bridge Historic Site, which I'm going to be talking more about today. Just to orient everybody to Cooch's Bridge, if anybody hasn't been there, so this is where we're looking. I-95 here is at the top of the screen, and so to the left is I-95 South. This is 896 running along the left-hand side of the screen, and heading towards the top is heading into Newark. And then over on the right-hand side of the screen, kind of parallel to 896, is Route 72. Again, heading towards the top of the screen would be heading into Newark. Cooch's Bridge is in this whole area here, really in the middle. But we have the Cooch Homestead, which I'm going to be talking more about. And then also the Cooch Diet Mill Complex, which is over here. And we like to say this site is logistically complex because we have 10 acres here where the Cooch Homestead is, on the other side of the Christina River, on the other side of the very busy Old Baltimore Pike. And after we get past some privately held land, we then have the Cooch Diet Mill Complex. So 10 acres over here, and then over at the Cooch Diet Mill, we have about 40 acres, some of which is floodplain. And so this is the mill right here. We do not own these buildings kind of right below the mill. And then cutting the mill property almost in half is an active Norfolk Southern Railroad line. And our only parking lot on the entire site is on the wrong side of the tracks from what we're doing, but there is a barn that is right here, and that is leased by the Pencader Heritage Area Association. They have the Pencader Heritage Museum, and so they are able to utilize that parking lot. We also have the Diet Miller's house that is right near that barn as well. Across the street there, we do have about another 20 acres that was purchased as an agricultural buffer to make sure it didn't get developed. So all told, we have about 60 acres on this side of the river and then 10 acres over here on this side of the river. So a very brief history of Cooch's Bridge Historic Site is certainly just like everywhere in Delaware for thousands of years, there were Native Americans utilizing the land. But at Cooch's Bridge, it was a very important spot because just to the west of us at that location is Iron Hill. And so people were coming from all over to mine the Iron Hill Jasper. And then the area that is now known as Cooch's Bridge was a very convenient spot located right along the river. There's a rise, so if the river was high, you wouldn't necessarily be in the water. But that way, people could work down the stone a little bit more and not have to carry as much with them. So this was a heavily utilized site for that. As colonists moved in, the James family is granted this land, and they're living there. They ultimately sell to the Cooch family in 1746. They did have a house on the site. It is not the current house. So as far as we know, the Cooch family did move into that house when they purchased the land. There was also a small mill on the site as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The oldest part of the current house was built around 1760, and this is part of that original house, although the third floor was not there. That is a later addition. So it would have been a smaller house just ending about here. There have also been quite a few changes on the inside of the house as well. The Cooch family did have family members. 7 generations of the family lived in the house from when it was built until 2010, and the state acquired the property in 2018. Now, Cooch's Bridge is most famous for the Battle of Cooch's Bridge, which is the only Revolutionary War battle on Delaware land. And there are a couple of myths associated with this battle. One is that it was an American loss, and the other is that the American flag first flew at this battle. And I won't get into the myth of the flag because that's a whole other discussion, but it didn't happen. I can tell you that. But as far as it being a loss, the American forces were never intended to win this battle. They were heavily outnumbered. They had no artillery support. They were American light infantry, so they were more elite troops. They were kind of thrown together, and they were there to delay the entirety of the British army that was landing at the head of Elk, which is now Elkton, to march on Philadelphia. And they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They delayed them not only during the course of the battle, but they also delayed them as the British then basically took over Cooch's Bridge, took it over as their headquarters for several days, and they recouped there. They brought everybody up from the river as they were continuing to march. So, in essence, the Americans did achieve their objectives, and in that sense, it was an American victory, even though they were not the ones who stayed on the land at the end of it. A brief history of the mill side. So the Cooch Diet Mill is the third mill on the site. As I mentioned before, the first mill was actually at the property right near the house, just down the hill, right along the river. Parts of the mill race do still exist there, so we have an idea of where it was. And then a second mill was built in 1792, a little further down on the other side of the Christina River and a little further down. And they had a much longer mill race, which I will show you in a moment. The Cooch Diet Mill is even further down and further away from the house. It was built in the 1820s. The Diet family purchases it in 1884. There are a couple of fires in the building in the early 20th century, one of which basically guts the interior of the building. So the upper right-hand corner here, you can see this is what the mill looked like when it was first built. And it had there was a grist mill for the entire life of the mill, but they had stones to grind the grain. And you can see it's a very different roof line. The windows are not exactly the same either. When they came back to rebuild it, because the Diet family did have fire insurance, they changed the roof line, which gave them more interior space. And on the picture here on the bottom left, you can see what that more interior space gave them. It gave them a lot more working room, for additional machinery. On the bottom right here, you can see the mill race when it is full. At the edge here, you can see that final gate. From that gate, it would go underground in a large pipe, and it would go to the turbine, which would then power the entirety of the mill. The mill operated until about 1995, and was purchased by HCA in 1996. And so here is that 1792 dam. It has been updated a bit over time. This is the Christina River. It continues to flow. The Homestead is up this way off screen. And then you can see the mill race that flows along here and goes along the agricultural fields. All of that comes to here. These are the main power gears. And the turbine would have been turning these gears. And this is the main power shaft that then goes into the building. Another couple of shots. So here you see the aerial shot of the mill complex here. This is the mill race as it comes under Old Baltimore Pike, and it comes down along here. And so this is the part that you saw flooded in that historic photograph, and it enters into the mill, and then you can see the tail race down here. This is some of that third floor machinery. This is a sifter. It was very kind of them to label everything right on the machinery. And there's that railroad line I talked about, making our site logistically complex. And when we get this part of the site open to the public and we have school groups coming, we're going to have the additional challenge of, we do have a helipad on our property here. The neighbors behind us are a helicopter company. They are great neighbors, but it's going to be fairly distracting to the school groups when a helicopter is coming in for a landing on the front lawn there. So again, just to orient you to the site, we were just looking right over here. There's the helipad. Here is the mill. And then here is that 1792 dam way up here by I-95. This is the mill race coming down. This holding pond was added later to give additional power and additional utilization of that mill race. The in-between mill, the 1792 mill, is actually this building right here. The foundation is all that's left of that original mill building, and it was turned into a barn effectively. So it is right there. That is not currently on our property. And then they extended the mill race down to the Cooch Diet Mill. So we've already completed a good deal of work. You can see here in this photograph that we had some work going on that screened-in porch. And so we did have to make some replacements there. The roof inside was falling in. There was some rot underneath. The roof was repaired and replaced in some sections and then repainted. And then we had all new screening. There's still some work that needs to be done to the columns, but since that's more structural, that's going to come with some later work to the house as we do more involved work on the house. We also replaced or repaired most of the roofs on the outbuildings, and then work on the exterior of the two largest outbuildings, the carriage house and the granary, and I'll show you some detailed photos of those in just a moment. We also did some masonry repairs on some of the buildings, and then also some of the brick pathways. And then not in the construction side of things, but we've also developed an interpretive plan as we move forward with the site. Here are some images of the carriage house. So in the larger photo, the carriage house is the one to the left. The granary is behind it to the right. And both buildings had to be lifted up off of their foundations. You can see there's some foundation work going on here in this bottom right-hand photo. Initially, we were expecting to receive some funds, some state funds, to help support this. And the Friends of Cooch's Bridge Historic Site were also fundraising to help support this project. The state funding didn't get passed in with the bond bill as expected. And so the Friends were able to step up and give us that initial bit of funding. It was almost $400,000 to get started, and then state funds kind of caught up with that. So that allowed us to start the project. The carriage house was actually lifted up off its foundation, and this part of the foundation, sort of in the middle back of the building, just collapsed. All that was holding it was the friction of the building sitting on top of it. So we're very lucky that the Friends were able to get that funding for us and help support us in that way so we could get that work started to make sure that there wasn't further damage to the building. The upper right here, you can see the granary. It was still lifted up off of its foundation. And a few more pictures here on the right of the granary. There were some beams that were in worse shape than expected once it was lifted up. So it had to be up in the air a little bit longer than expected while we were sourcing the proper size beams for it. Excuse me, this proper size beams for it. But thankfully it is back down and it looks good. This is the rear wall. We always try to salvage as much of the original material of these buildings as we can. The rear wall, unfortunately, was too far gone, so it was used as a pattern and replaced. You can see here we do have this interesting structure in the top left-hand corner, and that is because this was a dwelling for an African-American employee of the Cooch family, and then later it was used as an office by one of the Cooches, and so it was bricked in to help retain the heat, and there was a stove up there. When we acquired the property, the roofs were not in great condition. Sometimes you can take a look at a roof and go, there's another year or two out of that. We knew that was not the case here. That's a vulture sticking its head inside the roof to take a look to see if this would be a good place to live. And unfortunately, the vulture decided it would be a great place to live. So before we could start repairs on the granary, we had to hold off and let the vultures hatch their eggs and move on out. But here you can see the roof work being done once the carriage house was put back down. Here's that rear wall completed. And then here's the granary put back down, the repairs in place and repainted. And here we see them from the front, although in this spot, not all the windows are finished here. And there's still a little bit of painting to be done on the granary, but for the most part, they were almost complete at this point. We also did work, like I said, on the outbuildings. This is the smokehouse, and you can see it was completely covered, but we knew it was failing and it needed to be repointed. So that was taken down. We did save some of that original outer layer because we did want to have some of that. Originally, we were planning on replacing that and putting a new version of it back up. That's what why it was really important for us to save that original piece, so we would be able to educate the public about that. But once we saw there's a brick repair, there's different size stones. This obviously had a lot of change over time, and that's one of our themes of the property. The house changed a great deal over time. The property changed a great deal over time. And so we thought, right now, why don't we just leave that covering off, and we can use this as part of our interpretation about the change over time. On the left, you can see some of the brick pathways that were repaired as well. So the current situation, and why we are not fully open to the public yet, is because we have no accessible toilet facilities. We don't really have good toilet facilities for the public, even if they weren't accessible. The buildings themselves are not accessible, especially the house. There is a step up at least one step up at every door, and we have no parking lot. So you see quite a few cars here, and there's a few parking spaces here by in between the house and in front of the carriage house. If we ever have more than that, we are parking on the front lawn, which is not really sustainable and not something that we want to do in the long term. And certainly, we do not have a good entrance or exit. We just have the driveway, which was perfectly fine when it was a private residence. But as a public historic site, it really doesn't work. It's not suitable for buses. We wouldn't be able to welcome school groups with the way it is. So we do need to fix that and put a parking lot in there. And again, we have the 10 acres that surrounds this property, and then about 60 acres with the Cooch Diet Mill and that agricultural parcel. The land surrounding us is privately owned land. It is still owned by the Cooch family. It's about 190 acres, and it is under conservation easement. So the good news is it cannot be developed. And again, just to give you a sense of that, here is our 10 acres around the homestead. Here's that 190 acres, and then over here as well, and then part of the mill, and then part of that ag parcel. So prior to our larger project, which is partially funded from the National Park Service, we did receive some funding from a preservation grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation to do some archaeological work on site. And so there are a couple of foundations that are there on site that we wanted to investigate. We were also looking for evidence of the first house, the house that the Cooch family bought with the property that they were living in before they built the current house. There was some stories from the family that it might be under the current kitchen. There is a crawl space there that is a dirt floor. So we investigated there. We were also looking outside the house and hoping to either find evidence of that early house or an earlier summer kitchen. What we did find is inside the footprint of an early 20th century garage is this stone foundation wall. And it's really interesting because we knew there were several generations of agricultural buildings here on the property, but we didn't know where any of the other buildings were. So this was giving us a hint as to at least where one of them was. And we were going to be able to follow up with that work with the archaeological work that would need to be done for the National Park Service funded project. Closer to the house, we found what appears to be a brick clamp, and that is the picture here on the right. And due to its proximity to the current house, our theory is that it is not where the bricks were made for the current house. It may be the brick clamp that was used for the earlier house that the James family built. So it could also have been used for outbuildings, but some more investigation is going to need to be done there. So we didn't find evidence of that original house, except for maybe its brick clamp. But again, we need to confirm that. So again, here is the site. This is the current situation here. Just to orient you, this is the house. Here's the smokehouse that you saw a picture of, an ice house, the carriage house and granary. Here is that foundation of that early 20th century garage that I just mentioned. We also have the foundation of an earlier barn with a silo. We have a chicken house here. It is the nicest chicken house in Delaware because it has glass windows. And then here we have, it was most recently used as a shed, but it was also a dwelling unit at one point. It did have electricity and water running to it. Down here, there is a 1970s tenant cottage. And so that is currently occupied right now. And just to give you a sense with the aerial view, you can see the houses. It's really hard to see the outlines of those structures that are no longer there. What we are proposing to do is really make it possible for people to come visit us at this site. And so the west end of the driveway will be expanded. It'll be turned into a 2-lane road effectively. We will have an improved entrance, so there will be much better sight lines, so it'll be safer to turn into and especially turn out of the property, because Old Baltimore Pike is fairly narrow and people drive fairly quickly on that road. We also want to make sure that people are not trying to pull out over here by the bridge. That is not safe to do. So we don't want people heading that way. So this entrance will be improved and it will be widened. We will have a parking lot up here in the field. It'll be approximately 30 cars. We'll have a couple of accessible spaces. We'll also have a couple of spaces for buses. And that'll be a huge improvement and really expand how we can welcome the public here. There'll be a pedestrian walkway that then joins the driveway. The driveway will get some work as well. Per fire code, it needs to be widened for fire equipment for safety. And it is a gravel driveway. We are going to keep it a gravel driveway, but it is going to have a treatment on it so that it's not loose gravel, so it does meet accessibility needs. People will then be able to walk along the front of the buildings. And then to get into the house, what we're going to do is the grade will change slightly as you're walking towards the house. And there's only one step to get into the house on the doors that are in the dining room, which is about there, the kitchen, and then the rear back here. And so we will be at grade at that point so that it will be a smooth transition into the house. And that way we can do that without having unsightly ramps or things like that. And it'll look a lot more natural. So we'll be able to have accessibility into the house. And we are going to be adding bathrooms back here. There's a later addition on the house that was a laundry room and a pantry. And so those are being converted into bathrooms. I'll show you more on that in a moment. But to add bathrooms, we also need to add septic. And so we're looking for a new septic system somewhere in this field back here. And so these are sort of two of the proposed sites. And again, you can sort of see that. So the septic would be in this field. The parking lot would be up here. And this is where that improved entrance would be, right along here. Now, before we do any of that, as I mentioned, we did receive a National Park Service semi-quincentennial grant of $800,000 to help really jumpstart this work. Archaeological work before any ground disturbing activities is required. That is also our normal course of action for any jobs like this that we do for HCA. And so here you can see what was approved by the National Park Service. This is much more. We did add in this area because originally we were looking at septic in a different spot, but it turns out this is a better area for septic. So this was added. And this is much more area than we really need to investigate, but hopefully we are going to learn more through that investigation. But also, if it turns out there's a lot of artifacts up here that we don't want to disturb, we might have to slide the plan down here for the parking lot. This is much more than we need for the septic area. But again, we want to make sure we have some options in case where we're thinking isn't going to work, because we don't want to damage any buried cultural resources. So the phases to this work were the research, the ground penetrating radar metal detecting. And then once we sort of saw the results of that, we were given permission to move forward with the next phase, which was the shovel test pits and the limited test units. All of the field work has been completed. The artifacts are being looked at and cleaned up and cataloged, and we are waiting on the final report. And so here are some images from the work. You can see the ground penetrating radar carriage right there. And it's a little hard to see, so I have this other picture here. You can see these white lines. We actually thought we may have found, because that wall that I mentioned is right here and it was running this way, we thought we may have found where it was coming out and what it was attaching to. And we got really excited about that. You can see some of the ground truthing here with one of the test units. And unfortunately, what was discovered is that the Cooch family is really good at recycling. And when they no longer needed a building, they took all the salvageable building materials out of it. And then the hole that was left was filled in with just regular fill. And so we weren't able to determine where any other, we were able to determine where we think some other buildings are, but we can't tell what those buildings were because it was just fill that was left. There's no foundation stones. There's nothing left. They were very, very efficient in their demolition of those buildings and reusing those materials. However, while we didn't find some of those things that we were hoping for, some other archaeological work that happened off of our property here in the West Cornfield was successful and in finding some really interesting material. And I do want to thank Wade Katz and South River Heritage Consulting for sharing these slides with me so that I could share them with you. And so you can see here, they were working out in this field. Again, the homestead is over here. And they were looking for more evidence of the Battle of Cooch's Bridge. And so you can see here some metal detectors out here. There's our property, so the parking lot would kind of go right up there. And they were looking in the field while the corn was down. And some other people who worked on this were Dana Link from Great Chain Archaeological Consultants. And the metal detection was completed by some very skilled volunteer detectorists. And they were able to find a battle line, which is really, really exciting for all of us. It is believed to be a British light infantry battalion. And so they found a line, almost a straight line out in what is now a cornfield and probably was a cornfield then. And there were dropped musket balls, which you see here on the left, and they were the right size to be for Brown Bess, which would have been the British weapon. And then there were impacted musket balls that would have been fire coming in from the Americans that were the right size to be from Charleville muskets, which is what they would have been armed with. And then there were also assorted, so the musket balls, the rifle balls, the buckshot. There were also other dropped items, such as some coins that you can see here, and then some buttons, and then a sleeve link. So some of this is still being looked at as well. And again, many thanks to Wade Katz for sharing this so that I can show you. And all of this is very exciting because we all knew the battle took place at this site, but we didn't know exactly where any of the battle lines were. And so this gives us a really good starting point to know exactly where one is. Hopefully we can find some others so we have a better sense of exactly how the battle progressed, because there's not a whole lot written about it. There's nothing from the American side. There are some things from the British side. And so the more we can learn through archaeology is really, really exciting so that we can share that with the public. Again, to share that with the public, we need to make sure we're preserving and rehabilitating the site. And so that's what the other part of some of that National Park Service funding is going to be for. Here you can see the floor plan for the basement at the top. We're not going to really be doing much changes here, except we are putting in a new HVAC system. And so currently there is no central air conditioning in the building. There is a steam boiler and radiators throughout. That is very maintenance intensive. It's also not the most efficient. So we want to do a little better with that. And we're going to be putting in a forced air system where we have better control over the humidity, both in the summer and the winter. And so we don't have the fluctuations that we have now. Here in the basement, you can see evidence of what the house used to look like because we have relieving arches that are still visible in the basement that show where there were corner fireplaces in the two main rooms on the first floor originally. Those corner fireplaces are not there, and really there's no evidence on the first floor of where they were, but there is evidence here in the basement. So most of the basement here is going to be kind of filled with ductwork, and so that will be the big change there, but the structure itself will not change. Here on the first floor, again, we're not really doing much in the way of changes to the structure except this area here. That's going to be the bathrooms. I'll have more on that in a second. Again, here's the walkways that will have that sort of gentle rise so that there's no longer a step into the doors here or in the back here. We want to make sure that this first floor is fully accessible. There is a step here from the dining room into the center hall, so there will be a small ramp there to make sure that it is accessible into this space. These outer doors on the eastern side of the house are not going to have ramps or anything like that. It will be accessible from the inside, so you can get into that screened-in porch. Everybody will be able to get into that screened-in porch from the inside of the building. So we do want to make sure that is accessible. With the bathrooms here, you can see at the bottom here on the left is what they look like now. It is a laundry room and a pantry on the right. And what we are going to have is the exterior doors staying the same. The interior doors are staying the same. We are going to add an accessible restroom because of this, the limited space in this area. We are able to add one more restroom that does not meet accessibility, but we did want to make sure we had another toilet facility there. There's the required water fountains, and then we are going to have a small staff work area. There will actually be a door there as well. So that way, if we have a staff member who cannot easily do steps, they do have a good secure workspace as well. Here we have the second floor plan. The second floor is going to be primarily office space. And so this bedroom, and this bedroom have already been kind of changed over into offices. What we're going to be doing in this space, again, like the first floor, is we're going to be repairing plaster, repairing windows, repairing the floors, things like that. There'll be some HVAC equipment in these closets here. And then on the third floor, it's going to be primarily storage. We have an attic space that will get some duct work and an air handler. This is over the dining room and the kitchen. And then the shower in this bathroom will hold some HVAC equipment as well. Again, not really doing much in the way of changing the structure at all, but we are going to be repairing what is already there. Here you can see the elevations. Again, we're not really doing any change other than repairing. We're going to be repairing the stucco. We're repairing the roof, replacing the roof. The roof over the porch has already been replaced. We're going to be repairing, replacing as necessary the shutters, the windows, and just, making sure the house is in good shape and secure. So all of that is so that we can host the public and we can have programs on site and events on site. We do have very limited programming and events on site now because of the limitations that we face. The image that you see here was from the Friends of Cooch's Bridges 5th anniversary event. We were doing some programming. So we were giving some of their folks a sneak peek inside the granary. The granary and the carriage house were repaired on the outside so that their building envelopes are secure. A later phase of work, once we get the site open, will rehabilitate the interiors of those buildings so that we can use them as public space. And then actually in the distance here by the cornfield is Wade talking about his archaeological finds, and then talking about some of the other changes that are proposed for the property so that the people who were on site that day could learn a little bit more about what was coming as well. The Friends have also held Juneteenth celebrations at the site, and so we help host those. And then off-site, they've had several fundraisers that are called the Taste of Cooch's Bridge, and so those are a lot of fun as well. The Friends have also raised money to commission musical works by Jonathan Whitney, and those are inspired by the history of the site. It's going to be basically each one has several pieces to it. And it'll be sort of a 4-part suite with multiple pieces underneath of it. The first one was about the Cooch family, or inspired by the Cooch family. The second one was inspired by the African American experience. And the third one, which debuted last year, was about the battle. The next one will be debuting not next year, but in 2027, I believe, and that will be about the Native American experience on the property. We've also hosted multiple University of Delaware classes. Two classes actually were sort of based at the site. They spent part of their time in the classroom, part of the time sort of in this outdoor historic site lab. We've also hosted individual classes as they come for field trips. And then we are also in the planning stages for some educational outreach programs so that we can get out into schools even before all the work is completed. And that will help set up field trips coming into us once we can welcome them safely. And then ultimately, the first floor of the house is going to be utilized as an exhibit space. People have asked us if we're going to do it as a historic house museum with furnishings. The house has changed so much over time that there's no one period that, except for relatively recently, that really works for that. So we're going to utilize the spaces and tell the history of the full site. So we'll have information about milling, we'll have information about the battle, we'll have information about Native Americans utilizing the site again for thousands of years. We'll have information about the agricultural history, about the family's history, about all the other people who were living and working here at the site. And so that's how the first floor of the house is going to be utilized initially. And then also digitally, the Friends have partnered with us and they raised some funds and started a project that is now called the Bridging History Project. It's an African American database at Cooch's Bridge and actually has expanded beyond Cooch's Bridge. And we have almost 800 names on the database. And it's going to be launching soon. We're getting over a technical hurdle and then that will be available to the public online. And so people can learn more about people who were often left out of the history books, but they were a vital part of the growth of this area and everything that was happening here at Cooch's Bridge and in the surrounding land. So there's some really, really interesting information in there. So we look forward to that launching and being available to the public. And we have quite a few descendants who have been in touch with us who are very excited about that launching as well. And so that is my presentation. I want to make sure I have some time for questions. So I want to thank everybody for joining me here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. It's so exciting to see the plans and what's going to happen there and how it relates to the history. Is there a timeline for these improvements?
Yes. So our goal is to be open for the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Cooch's Bridge, which would be the exact date is September 3rd, 2027. That happens to fall on a Friday, which isn't necessarily the best day for a big opening because people will be at work. So we are working with the Friends to sort of have a preview evening. They're going to have, it looks like it's still in the early stages, but it looks like they'll have their Taste of Cooch's Bridge event on site for the first time. So people will be able to come out and have some food inspired by some of the history of the site from a bunch of local chefs. They'll be able to get a sneak preview of what's going on. We'll have some programs that night as well. But then the official grand opening for everybody, although the public is invited to that and there'll be more information on that, will be on the 4th, which is the Saturday. And so we're looking at having sort of an encampment with reenactors so that people can learn more about, what happened in the battle and how soldiers were living. Certainly the house will be open and we'll be talking about sort of the development of the site as well on that day. So we are just under 2 years away.
So looking at fall to 2027, so everybody can keep that in their calendars. No excuses to miss it. We got plenty of advance warning. Speaking of the battle, one question here is, I think you mentioned that not a lot of documentation or written history from the American side either has been found or exists. Why do you think that is?
So I would say I will defer if I don't know if Wade Katz is on, but he certainly is the preeminent historian about the Battle of Cooch's Bridge. So I am effectively quoting him. So Wade, if you're there and I get something wrong, I apologize. But there's quite a few reasons. I think primarily you have units who were kind of thrown together. They had not necessarily served with each other. They were smaller units that then got fairly quickly reincorporated into the larger army and back with sort of their home units. You have this delaying action, then they're quickly moving and trying to regroup with the main American force, which ultimately led to the Battle of Brandywine. We know that didn't go well for the American forces. So it may have just been there simply wasn't time to write things down. Or those things were written down, but in all of those movements, they got lost along the way. They didn't get saved throughout time. So there's lots of different factors. But those are, we don't know how much was ever written by the American side about it. But certainly none of it is known to have survived at this
Hmm.
point. Hopefully somebody finds something in their attic.
That'd be very convenient. I noticed one thing that really tied kind of all the presentations we had so far this morning, was as you said, promoting the history of those who are not usually documented or haven't been in the past. So we talked about Marion Coffin at UD, who's a female landscape architect, um and about the Native American and African American history at this site. Has that played a big part in the planning for the future of this site? And I know you talked about it. There's going to be interpretive, I don't know, exhibits, or can you talk a little bit more about your thoughts and how that's incorporated into the future of this site?
Certainly. It's something we're really doing across the division. And all of our museums, it is something that's very important to us to make sure that we are telling that full and complete history so that everybody is represented in our state's museums. Here, we have the opportunity to kind of do it from the get-go, because some of our sites have been museums for many, many, many years. So it's sort of a change at some sites. Here. We're doing it kind of whole cloth right from the beginning. Certainly, like I said, people really know the battle. That's why people remember this site. That's why if people have even heard of the site, that's probably why they've heard about it. The battle is a very key part of the history of the site. But if you look in the grand scope of time, it's a very small, time-wise, it's a very small piece of that history. So it is key to what we're going to be talking about. Um, but we also want to make sure there's really interesting agricultural history taking place here. There's really interesting industrial history taking here. None of that happens in a vacuum. That is happening with the labor of people. And before Europeans were here, it was Native Americans who were utilizing this land and preserving this land. And so we want to make sure we're recognizing that appropriately, and working with our tribal partners to do so. But then once Europeans move in, it is Europeans and also enslaved and indentured people. And so we want to make sure that history is told as well. And so there will be exhibits in the house. Ultimately, we are going to continue work on, we have some smaller projects going on now on the mill side to make sure that building envelopes are secure so that we can get over and do more work over there in the future when funding allows. Ultimately, we want to get that side of the property open to the public as well. We are looking to add some more pathways. Newcastle County is looking at a trail plan that would actually help connect the two pieces of our properties. And so we are working with them on that as well. And some of that will be some waysides along the trails that we'll be helping develop. Some will be waysides on our properties. And really looking to work with the other historical and cultural organizations in the area to help promote those programs and work together, so that we can develop waysides, we can develop exhibits, and we can all kind of be pulling in the same direction.
That's great. Great to hear. We have one last question before we get to our next speaker, but here, were there things that you and the team learned from the John Dickinson plantation site that may be great changes to the new Cooch's Bridge site?
So it's really interesting. There are a lot of, while they are very different, distinct sites, there are a lot of similarities. They're both agricultural sites. There's no mill down at the John Dickinson plantation. They are both sites of enslavement. In both cases, people were freed, were manumitted before it was legally required to do so. However, we know for sure at the John Dickinson plantation there were tenants that were renting from John Dickinson who were still enslaving people. Here, we know there were tenants scattered around because the Cooches owned a big swath of land. We don't know for sure at this point if some of those tenants were enslaving people. But there's a pretty good likelihood that it was happening, at least for part of the time. So there are a lot of big similarities, and certainly our staff can work